It's on the YouTube channel?
Correct. It's on the PNCA live video channel homepage.
And it'll just come up when someone logs into that.
Correct. Yeah. People should have the link to that. Okay. We are live.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the PNCA Low-Residency Creative Writing Readings. Summer Residency 2020. Tonight we have Perrin Kerns, Brandon Shimoda, and Tyrone Williams. Heads up, tomorrow night, Matt Hart, myself, Jay Ponteri, and Allison C. Rollins will read. On Friday, July 31st, we have our first of two special guest readings, Jenny Booley and Katie Hannigan. And on Saturday, August 1st at 6:30 p.m., Pupe Misagi and Daniela Naomi Molnar. All of the readings, you can go to PNCA's live YouTube channel and just watch them there. Our first reader tonight is Perrin Kerns. Perrin currently teaches literature and writing at Prescott College, Portland State, and Clark College. She served as the director of writing at Marylhurst University before it closed. Her own creative work has taken her from lyric essay to digital story to personal narrative documentaries. She teaches creative nonfiction, feminist theory, digital storytelling, women writers, African American literature, and modernism. Please welcome Perrin Kerns.
Hi, everyone. First, I want to just send out some appreciation to my fellow teachers. I've really enjoyed the craft talks and the reading so far. It actually feels like we've been here a much longer time together than we have been, just because there's been so much learning in that time. And I want to send some appreciation to all the students who are doing such great writing. I read all the different packets of writing and was impressed with everybody's work. Before I start my reading, I just wanted to give you a heads up about my craft talk on Tuesday. Within an hour, I'm going to have you guys make a short film. So if you plan on coming to that, you need to bring a piece of writing that's 50 to 100 words. And also, if you're on a PC, you need to get a free sign on to WeVideo. If you're on any Mac device, you can just have iMovie and we'll work with that. So that's just a little heads up ahead of time. So the piece I'm going to read today, am I too loud?
No.
No? Okay. The piece I'm going to read today is 7 pages, so it should take about 14 minutes. It's a fragmented essay. It's a lyric essay, a personal essay. There's a lot of lists in it and multiple sections with titles. So I'll try to make those clear to you as I read. I did want to give a content warning about this piece. It's about death and about multiple deaths. And it's about my obsession with death. And it is very serious, but I hope funny too. But I won't be offended if you are feeling anxious about death and don't feel like listening to a piece about death right now. So if you can't stay tuned in, that's fine. Okay, I think that's all I'm going to say. I'm going to start reading. How the Easter Bunny Killed My Sister, or otherwise titled 100,000 Ways to Die. And then there's a quote from Albert Camus. But what does it mean, the plague? It's life, that's all. It sounds funny, but it isn't a joke. An Easter bunny really did kill my sister. We even have it on film. My uncle somehow didn't notice the wild rabbit he caught on his farm was moving slowly, perhaps because he was so depressed himself. On Easter, this sad uncle brought his unusually docile bunny as a gift to my sister Joni, who had would turn 3 in a few days. In the home footage, you see a tiny little girl in a short sleeve white Easter dress, petting the bunny as it sits on a low table right in front of her. With one hand, she is stroking the fur on its back. Then she stops and puts her head around to peer right into the bunny's face with a look of total love. She pulls back, picks it up. An older relative lifts the bunny out of Joni's arms, and the frightened bunny's claws scratch her little fat arm. Joni holds the wound and cries. The grown-ups standing around her, including my mom, hardly notice. Section 2. The bunny comes knocking, or how the plague gave birth to me. 5 days later, my sister was dead. The autopsy came back, bubonic plague. My mom's own daughter's dead body was the first dead body she'd ever seen, and Joni became the sorrow that informed all of our living, even for me, born after her death as a succor to the loss. A scratch can kill you became my mom's silent mantra as she paced the border between death and her remaining children. Her main method of patrol was the art of storytelling. She told us complicated tales about ways to die so that we could be wary and watchful. The stories were life buoys that we might catch on to right before we drowned. Section 3, my mom counts the ways. 1, once there was a woman trapped in an elevator in a department store during a fire. The smoke slowly seeped in through the cracks and the heat began to rise. And well, that was the end of her. 2, last week at Hesida Beach, a boy waded into the ocean and turned his back to the waves. A big one came and he was never seen again. 3, when your grandma was little, she was asked to a slumber party and her parents didn't let her go. And then that night, someone killed all those little girls with an axe. Imagine hearing that when you're a little girl being invited to slumber parties. Section 4, life buoys. I am the youngest child and the most expendable, so I clung on hardest to my mom's warning tales and began collecting my own stories of death, like most kids collect dolls or stuffed animals. I scanned the newspaper for information. Imagining all the ways to die became my primary occupation in life. 1, there was the bear that pulled the one girl with her period out of the family tent. 2, there was the rock that randomly fell off the cliff and landed on the man meditating down below. 3, there was the Christmas tree and its lovely white toxic snow painted on in a closed garage by the crafty mother and daughter. 4, there was the Thanksgiving turkey cooked too slow. 5, there was the single bad wild mushroom put in the casserole. 6, there was the salamander that was accidentally scooped up into the camp coffee pot the night before and boiled for coffee in the morning. 7, there was the gas water heater silently leaking carbon monoxide. 8, there was the strawberry that made the boy blow up like a balloon. 9, there were the 2 men who worked on the road crew who picked up our neighbor when she was out running along the Metolius River. She was found later, all in pieces in the woods. And then, of course, there were all the men who snuck into houses or followed women or girls out of stores or found one walking alone and then left her dead eventually just because she was female. Surely you begin to get the idea. There are tens of thousands of ways to die, even hundreds of thousands, and such a catalog of death can guide your life. I spent all my time avoiding elevators, oceans, salamanders, flocked Christmas trees, strawberries, gas appliances, wild bunnies, mushrooms, men who look like serial killers, solitude, the wilderness, and finally, almost all of life. I knew that I could outwit death for both me and my family if I only kept vigilant watch. By the time I was in my 20s, I could hardly move. Section 5. The bodies begin to pile up, or if you are born from a plague, it just keeps following you. 1, 5 years old. My mom and I drive up the hill towards home and see a puddle in the road, but it isn't a puddle. It is Puddles, our dog. We ask Eldon, the owner of the marketeria, if he has a shovel and a box we can use. When we get home with the remains, I try to tell my brothers and sisters what is in the box, but I can't stop laughing. I laugh so hard I can't speak, and they keep saying angrily, "She has completely lost it." 2, 19 years old. My aunt and I are eating Campbell's tomato soup when the phone rings. Grandma sees Grandpa out lying in the field near their house. My aunt lives on the same farm, so soon we see him too, a plaid splotch in the middle of sagebrush and ponderosa pine. "I'll call the ambulance," I say. Then there's nothing else to do but go out to him. My aunt is already there looking down at him with her arms crossed. He is purple and blue. I tilt his head back like I had done on Resurrection Annie and breathe into his mouth. But now there's a deep rattle, like a bunch of marbles in an empty tin can. I keep pounding on his chest and breathing into the rattling can until the ambulance comes. This takes a long time since we are out in the country. When I go to view him in the open casket at the funeral home with my family, I can't stop laughing. The laughter rattles my body for a long time. It doesn't stop even after the long drive home. 3, 26 years old. A group of women friends are on our way to a river trip on the San Juan. We are so happy, headed up a winding road into the deep desert wilderness. Then frantic arms flag us down. There is a man on the road, a wrecked motorcycle. I have just taken an all-day first aid class the day before, but stand paralyzed. Luckily, one of our friends is a nurse, and as a full moon rises over the canyon walls, the man dies. 2 of my friends are covered in his blood. For the next week, I'm sure we are all going to die on that river. A rattlesnake, a bad can of food, flipping in a rapid, a scorpion, choking. Something is going to get us like it got the young man, and I can't sit still. My whole body is vibrating. 39 years old. 4, 39 years old. Pregnant with my second child in yoga class, there is a strange crunch in my pelvis, just as the teacher says, "Don't do this move if you are pregnant." That night, in my dream, there's an owl with 2 babies in a nest in the ceiling above my bed, and one of the babies drops down. There's no way for me to get the chick back into the nest, and it is too little to survive without its mother. 2 days later, I start to bleed, and I lose my baby. For the next year, I am an empty can. Everything rattles around inside. Section 6. How the fear of death creates the other. In graduate school studying feminist theory, I spent a long time thinking about binaries. Language, at least in Western culture, is premised on binaries, and binary thinking was at the root of much of our troubles, it seemed. Western culture had pushed the body to one side of the binary equation, and those who were counted as the other, women and people of color, for example, are associated with the body, while the generic subject or the white male is associated with the mind and the voice. This need for the creation of the other was partly our denial of the other within ourselves, as we are always already strangers to ourselves. But also, it was a direct result of our fear of death that is marked by our messy bodies. The more we have a clean, pure subjectivity in language, and claim the power of being only mind, voice, and soul, the more we can believe that we are somehow separate or above this body and above the deterioration towards death. Language can stand as a fortress upon which we imagine our I will remain solid and permanent. We can assert a transparent subjectivity that neither actually acknowledges language as a made thing nor ourselves as made matter on the way to the grave. But language as literature can also be a door instead of a fortress that carries us back to the body and back to death. It becomes a political act to live in the gesture of language that reminds us of our body. and reminds us that everything is made. We can be reminded that we are in the constant state of being unmade towards death. Some writers take us to that way of being more than others through a kind of gesturing of language that refuses to name. Buoys for life. Whoops, I've lost track of my sections. I think it's section 7. When my first child was born, I barely let him out of my sight. Yet I did find myself trying to curtail the stories of horror for him. When he had a bad head injury at age 2, and I held him down on the table while the ER doctors sewed up the gaping wounds on his face and head, I was able to say, "Breathe, Guthrie, breathe. You are going to be okay." When he developed croup at age 3 and squeaked between seal barks, "I'm dying, Mommy, I'm dying." Even though my heart was racing, and I remembered that Joni had said this to my mom the day she died, I said to him, "No, you aren't. You're gonna live." He needed me to believe that life was just as strong a force as death for a little one, and actually did sometimes win the day. When he was 4, I heard my mom telling him one of her stories. So they put the little boy on top of the mattress on the back of the pickup truck. Later, I heard him burst into sobs. No more, I thought, no more obsessive death stories, no more counting the ways to die. I had to tell him new kinds of stories about the Earth's incredible generative power and its cyclical wonders of deterioration and regeneration. I began meditating on the Buddha's five remembrances offered by Thich Nhat Hanh. 2 of them I repeated over and over again. 1, I am of the nature to die. There's no way to escape death. 2, all that is dear to me and everyone I love are of the nature to change. There's no way to escape being separated from them. Through looking at death instead of for it, I tried to find a new relationship to my fear. The Exquisite Corpse. My dad at age 84 received a death sentence, melanoma. Suddenly a calm descended on me. Perhaps it was my age, my studies, my motherhood, my Lexapro, my meditation, or maybe just the fact that death, the menace that had been suspended over our family circle since before my birth, was finally back to take another one of us. But this time it would be a slow taking, and I could help. Cleaning my father's wounds, draining fluid from his tubes where his lymph glands used to be, wiping crust from his crotch, I became his companion in deterioration. When he finally died, his corpse to me was truly exquisite. His back still warm against the bed while his surface cooled. His head a round smooth ball in my hands as I caressed it. His hands like 2 stone birds asleep on his chest. No longer human, but all the beautiful traces of his animal body remained. I even loved it when I put my head on his chest and the weight of it pushed one last rattling breath out of his body onto my cheek. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Perrin. Beautiful. Before I introduce Brandon, I did want to mention that tomorrow morning at 10 a.m., Tyrone Williams will be giving his talk called Outsider Eco-Poetics. Shauna Lipton and Sloan McNulty will start their 4-day sequence in discussion of feminism and queer theory. Those are 2 talks open for the public tomorrow. Our next reader is Brandon Shimoda. Brandon is the author of several books of poetry and prose, most recently The Grave on the Wall, which received the PEN Open Book Award. He is currently writing a book of short stories centered around a young woman who, the morning after her husband dies, shaves off her eyebrows. And also a book on Japanese American incarceration. He is also the curator of the Hiroshima Library, an itinerant reading room collection of books on the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, currently under quarantine at the Japanese American National Museum in Los Angeles. Please welcome Brandon Shimoda.
Hi, everyone. Nice to almost see you all. Just to let you know, because I'm always curious about what people are looking at when they're looking into their cameras, I'm facing into my kitchen. Not that anybody asked, but I thought I'd share that. So I'm feeling indecisive. I narrowed down my reading to 2 essays that both take 15 minutes to read. Of course, I'm only going to read one of them, but I thought I could go either way. So I thought maybe I'd ask you. I was going to tell you their titles, and if we could somehow make use of the chat, and if you don't mind doing this, it's kind of hokey, but I'm going to have you vote based on the title which one you might want to hear, and I'll see if I can tabulate up what you put in the chat. So one essay is called M&Ms, as in the candy, and the other essay is called Permanent Eyebrows. So maybe if all the people who want to hear permanent eyebrows, if you could just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think it's already permanent eyebrows by a landslide. There's 3 so far for M&Ms, 1 for either, but okay, thank you. Permanent eyebrows. Another for M&Ms. Another for M&Ms. Hold on, yes, this is chaos. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah. Thanks for your enthusiasm for either one of them. So I'm going to read Permanent Eyebrows. And I apologize if I didn't count properly. So this is actually, just to quote Perrin, this is my obsessive death story. So that's my content warning. It's an essay about my father and his wife. It deals with genocide. There are references, I think relatively neutral references to male genitalia, reference to mental illness, war crimes, that's the vote. So hopefully it's not too heavy. It's called Permanent Eyebrows. And thanks so much for listening. I'm going to dedicate this to the 4 students that I've worked with so far, for the 4 writers that I've worked with so far. Apologies to them, Joanna, Jana, Casey, and Brian. Thanks for everything. Permanent Eyebrows. The first time my father's wife met my grandmother, she offered to give her permanent eyebrows. It was Thanksgiving years ago. My father's wife, what should I call her? I do not want to use either her name or her first initial, so for ease of expression, I will call her MFW. MFW scrutinized my grandmother's face with forensic attention, registering the aspects that impressed her as imperfections. My grandmother's eyebrows were thin, sparse, unruly. They suggested a lack of self-regard that MFW found spiteful. She wanted to change them at once. It was not uncharacteristic. The first time MFW met my father, she asked if he ever considered getting the moles on his face removed. He thought she was being flirtatious. I have lasers, she said. The erasure began. The first time I saw my father after he met MFW, his face and neck were covered in Band-Aids. He had either cut himself many times or was sick. My father showed me a picture of MFW, or I guess I should say MFG, on his phone. She was sitting on a rock in the middle of a river. She removed my moles, he said. He looked different, but it was difficult at first to tell how. It was like his features were adding up to something only slightly different, like he was his own generic doppelganger. The first time I met MFW, she showed me her penis portfolio, a 3-ring binder thick with before and after close-up photographs of penises, which, she explained, she had reconstructed with lasers. In the before photos, the penises were discolored, scarred, mauled, mangled, mutilated. In the after photos, the penises were recovering, but looked only a little less wounded. When my sister and I and our grandmother arrived at Thanksgiving, MFW's mother looked at our grandmother and started yelling in Mandarin and moving frantically around the apartment. MFW and her brothers tried to calm her down. She would not calm down. MFW translated what her mother was yelling. She wanted my grandmother out of the apartment. It was painful enough, MFW said, that her daughter was marrying a Japanese man, but now his Japanese mother was in the apartment. MFW and her brothers grabbed their mother by the arms and walked her to the door. She resisted, because why should she be the one to leave? MFW's mother is mentally ill, my father told me years later, as if that explained anything. I had not seen my father in 3 years. He and MFW invited Lisa and me out for lunch and insisted that we eat somewhere healthy because they were on an organic food kick. We went first to Arby's for roast beef sandwiches, then across the parking lot to Wendy's for fries. My father, who is not a large man, dumped several orders of fries on his tray. He and MFW began recounting the Thanksgiving when MFW's mother had to be taken out of their apartment. She's mentally ill, my father said, to which MFW added, she survived the rape of Nanking. Then she told us a story. Her mother was actually from Guangzhou. She was 9 when the Japanese invaded. Her entire family was beheaded. Everyone but her and her little brother. They were spared, then enslaved for 3 years before escaping. She and her brother walked from Guangzhou to Hong Kong, a distance of more than 100 miles. She had been preparing for the walk since before the Japanese invaded, before her family was murdered by saving grains of rice. She and her brother left at night. The guards were asleep. They walked barefoot over farms and fields. At one point, MFW's mother tripped on a rock and spilled the rice in the mud. Her brother begged her to keep going, but she insisted they pick up each grain of rice. It was like she risked being shot not only because she had for so long been saving the rice, but because she had already died. Later, they found a cave near a river. The cave was half underwater. They hid in the cave. There were soldiers on the other side of the river. The day before their wedding, my father and MFW took us, my sister, me, and our soon-to-be stepbrother, to Chiang Ek, the killing fields in Phnom Penh, Cambodia. We walked in the grass across the beaten mounds and stared at the 5,000 skulls behind the glass walls of the imperial stupa. The skulls were organized in stacks and rows and were all facing out. There was no right way. There were only wrong ways to take in the skulls, to approach them, to get closer to them, to move from one incomprehensible mass of skulls to another, and no immediate or accessible way to even think about them. Staring at the skulls seemed to animate only the most menacing dead ends of existence, from the far side of which our staring seemed to emanate. All of the thinking and all of the genuine scrutiny was happening within the skull's gaze. We were the most perverse and clashing presence on the scene, and there was no right way to turn around and take leave. As we were lost in the meaning or the meaninglessness of being taken by our parents on the eve of their wedding to the killing fields, a group of local children started chasing my stepbrother around the stupa. They had singled him out among us and were laughing. He tried to run away, but they thought he was playing, so they kept chasing him and laughing. Earlier that day, we visited Tuol Sleng, the school turned prison where tens of thousands of Cambodians were detained, interrogated, tortured, and executed by the Khmer Rouge, 1975 to 1979. The prisoners are remembered by thousands of black and white photographs arranged in grids on panels and on the walls of the former classrooms, each person with a number pinned to their chest. The photographs form a portrait not of people, but of record keeping, which is, I guess, people, the imploded soul at the center of what once presented as people. If they form a portrait of humanity, it is a portrait of the aspect of humanity that administrates genocide through record keeping. It was, after all, a genocide museum. Its subject was not people, but genocide. What could be learned about the people from the photographs more than that they had been murdered? Was there a way to be with the photographs and the people in the photographs without almost instantaneously allowing ourselves to be returned to our own limited imaginations of what each person and all the people together might have been thinking? Were the photographs depicting the last time each person was specific? I tried to see as many faces as I could. I wanted to acknowledge something about each face, but I was only able to spend time with 9 or 10 faces before I was distracted by the sound of crying. It started on the ceiling, then dripped down the walls. I made the vulgar assumption that it was an audio recording, part of the installation, even as I thought that there was no way such a melodramatic and especially mocking element would or could have been poured down the terrorized expressions of the thousands of faces. I peered around one of the panels and saw, with her nose practically touching the wall, the American actress Ashley Judd. It is jarring to see a celebrity, but to see a movie star in an empty genocide museum in Cambodia is to be tricked for a moment into thinking that you are in a movie, because that is the only context in which the movie star has ever existed. So how could it be otherwise? Ashley Judd's crying was soft, but the emptiness of the room and the cavernousness of the museum made her crying loud. I looked around to see if any of the other very few people, including my family and MFW's family, had also heard the crying, but had peered around the panels to find Ashley Judd. My father and MFW were standing in the grass outside the room I was in, holding hands beneath a palm tree. Ashley Judd's crying did not solemnize the silent struggle of the dead to assert themselves beyond the photographs, but glazed the emptiness of their passage into death. I had only spent time with my stepbrother once before the wedding. My sister and I were visiting my father and MFW at their apartment. Our stepbrother met us in the lobby. I was 2 steps inside the door when my stepbrother said, "Can I talk to you for a second?" Strange, I thought, but okay. My sister went up the elevator. There was a love seat in the lobby, bookended by 2 enormous vases overflowing with fake flowers. We sat down. "I read one of your poems online," my stepbrother said, "and I was disturbed." Then there was a long pause. I thought I should interject, but I did not know where he was going with this, and I did not know what poem he was referring to, so I let the silence play itself out. Then he said, "Is it true?" "Is what true? Is it true that your father has a lot of girlfriends?" I laughed. The flowers, though fake, stank. They were heady, and I was certain that they too were laughing. Then my stepbrother pulled a piece of paper out of his pants pocket, unfolded it slowly, read it to me, also slowly, and with both hands shaking and shaking the paper, one of my poems, then refolded the paper and laid it on the love seat between us. "It was a dream," I said. "The women were not actually there." He was not appeased. "And besides, it is only a poem. It was true. It was only a poem. So much so only a poem that the magazine in which it was published no longer exists. And so much only a poem that I managed somehow not to save it. But here is the story. I accompanied my father to Laos in the summer of 2003, 1 year before his wedding, several months before he met MFW. We were sharing a room in a guest house. One night, my father was eating oranges in bed. He was shirtless, on his stomach, the sheet pulled up to his waist, with his hearing aids out, peeling oranges over the pillow. The peels were gathering in the sheets and falling onto the floor. That night, I dreamed 5 women entered our room and formed a circle around my father's bed. In the dream, I woke up. I could hear the women's feet and their breathing, but my father did not. The 5 women stood over him, looking down at his body. In the morning, I wrote the dream down. Dream or poem, my father had become a senseless fruit, colorful yet decomposing. The 5 women had come to harvest what remained of his body. How could I explain any of this to my stepbrother? If every character in a dream is the dreamer, then the 5 women were poets, tending to my father's corpse. How wonderful, I thought, for 5 women to make one poet over the citrus-smelling corpse of a deaf man. MFW looked at my grandmother's face. Your eyebrows have to go, she said. She put my grandmother in a chair. She shaved off my grandmother's eyebrows. Then the needle came out. She cut my grandmother's face. Then she inserted dark brown, nearly black ink in the cuts, my grandmother's new eyebrows. They would be permanent. But wouldn't her natural eyebrows grow through the ink? Doesn't hair never stop growing? No, hair stops growing. Without glucose and oxygen, the hair matrix that forms the bed of each follicle dries up, but the hair that has already grown never dies. My grandmother is alive, but I cannot help because she has tattoos above her eyes to think of her eyebrows after she dies. Will her permanent eyebrows truly succeed her? The thought locates the source of my grandmother's permanent eyebrows in the kind of ancestral hatred that aims to infiltrate in order to occupy an enemy's face. MFW signed my grandmother's face, and yet the ink is already fading. The hairs of my grandmother's original natural eyebrows poking up through the purpling ink are regaining their prominence. When she dies, though, and is cremated, the fire will take off her eyebrows first. Her eyebrows will rapidly burn like the wicks of small firecrackers, sacrificing themselves in advance of the rest of her body. Thank you.
Brandon, thank you so much. Beautiful reading. Tonight's final reader is Tyrone Williams. Tyrone teaches literature and theory at Xavier University in Cincinnati. He is the author of several chapbooks and 6 books of poetry, CC, On Spec, The Hero Project of the Century, Adventures of Pi, Howl, and As Is. A limited edition art project, Trump Loyal, was published by Hostile Books in 2017. He and, Tyrone, I'm sorry if I'm going to mispronounce Jian's name, but Jian Huibing edited the anthology Inciting Poetics. Let's welcome Tyrone Williams.
Thanks, Jay. I think I'm going to read 5 poems and part of a short memoir essay, which also, keeping with the theme for tonight, concerns death. But first, the 5 poems. So this poem was, as I say, commissioned. Write a poem about a movie you have never seen. So the title of the poem has 2 titles. or 2 movies in it. It's a Wonderful Life and They Are Rain Men. Who they were, unscrambled how, huddled standing single, were each wet and overcoat, slightly Adam for the hunchback in front. As for now, reversing one, he in wind, the hawk cuts, the eagle flies, wide out of the frame. They show their asses all over town, they country hands folded neat like flags, boxed up soldiers. Over sagging pants they feats, too slow to stutter step, a lump of ocean limited. Actually existing white lives antimatter. Fat as facts, balloons tied to a mailbox, low on oil, seize up, flag down, and clown crowd a cab. Inhale, swell, crowd out the cab driver. He ends up on the street, a loiterer, or, if lucky, in the bed of a pickup, the car of a train. As the miracle taxi, full of balloons, grows larger until they're in a plane without a pilot, kicking air, taking sky. Born on death row. There are so many ways to die of value before a lethal injection of happiness pursues its ends and ends the matter, a wake of itself. As the beautiful debris of wedding trains congealed into the bosom and the mouth, instinct opens. No choice in the matter. Swallows cock the sky in gorgeous time. Travels God as a circulatory or nervous system in which kingdoms reign. Orders rise and raises seen before the cars turn their self-same backs to show diverse, invisible faces. Storied chips, bright as vacancy signs, the wage workers plus fixed salaried women working, one hand free. Hit me again. One nailed to the velvet glove of a tabletop on its last legs. Dead, not dead. Trees don't get to walk away, say the works of Saul. Bazaar. Not the scored strings of a marionette, but the backhanded marketplace, where the wares of displacement net returns. The condensations hawk, fisticuffs, tag, wrestling, a dislocated angel, visible in the cloud chamber of commerce. One thing bleeds, another 2.0, and a third deals from under the deck slaves, marked persons of compound interests. A hand about to have a fit inks, no strings. A lien, the financial term, L-I-E-N. Bias of correction, foundation angles toward the proximity of against, as if a house in home destabilized, exchange clothes. A room slides off the shoulder. A skirt slams shut, jams traffic. And still the unabated, if incremental, slips in and out as weather permits. The company car adds a cart, clockwise, in reverse, a cartridge cartwheels. A rearview mirror shatters. shards left, not the only non-sides left, for the siding too is nothing other than a frame descending with the framed. Look back up at night on earth, call the blood spots lights, lights the splatter patterns of coins dropped on a palm and called change. So for the rest of the reading, I'm going to read a few pages from this memoir called Searching for Music, Finding Only Noise, which is a phrase from a letter from a friend, the subject of this memoir. It is organized according to every section goes plastic, paper, plastic or paper, which is the sort of thing they used to say in a grocery store. And I think you'll see why the sections are organized that way. So we'll start with in the middle with plastic. Strange that I should recall them. Ordinarily, when I think of Bill, I think of his closet full of comic books. He was an inveterate reader and collector. Less than a sign of arrested development, they were, I think, or want to think, an apt representation of the way that Bill understood the intrinsic absurdity of American life in the 20th century. Of course, Bill being Bill, this indictment included himself as well. We were all performers, actors and actresses, cartoons pretending to be everything we were not. Bill's observations are neither profound nor unique. We've all heard and read this kind of analysis before. In so many ways, Bill was just an ordinary man, but because he was my friend, I know that he was an ordinary man who was not allowed to be an ordinary man. Because what he wanted to be, his understanding of ordinariness turned out to be impossible. He was the customer in the grocery store who, when asked paper or plastic, could only reply, yes. Or, had we been boarding a Greyhound bus in the downtown area of some faltering metropolis, far from whatever shopping and banking remained, far from the occasional restaurants and unremarkable, however touted tourist attractions, Bill's brown paper bags of clothing, comic books, and toiletries might not have warranted a single glance, much less a double take. But we were boarding the Amtrak to Toronto, and though we were boarding from Detroit, a city long in decline, but still at that time vibrant with possibility, our fellow passengers looked askance at Bill, at me, at us. Everyone knew that you had to have the proper luggage, be it leather, cloth, or plastic. No one traveling to Toronto was supposed to appear as though he was a homeless derelict. To travel on public transportation like Amtrak, as opposed to, say, a Greyhound bus, is to go to church in one's Sunday's best. That is, one's weekend attire. Bill's indifference to the niceties of public decorum did not, needless to say, help him in his general desire to be accepted for who and what he was. Indeed, his clothing in general failed to measure up to the stereotype of gay clothing. He didn't have the money or inclination to dress the part. Paper. Having been such good friends since our introduction by my erstwhile college girlfriend at the time, Bill and I hung out, talked politics and music all the time. Because he was ethnically Caucasian, he was tolerated, if not welcomed by the table. That nickname that Black college students have always given to the special site in student center buildings where they congregate, where they often get accused of segregating themselves, though such judgments are rarely rendered against the many white tables surrounding them. The table was where I met and talked with many of my friends between classes, where relationships were formed and broken, where arguments and weekend plans first took shape. Bill was the outsider, though his good-natured humor, his refusal to let anyone or anything stop him, his sheer bluster made him as much a staple of the table as anyone else. Still, he never became friends with anyone else at the table. And when she found out that Bill had come out, my ex-girlfriend gradually drifted away from him. Hemp, rattan, mulberry, bamboo, rice, straw, seaweed. Or, I can't recall now why we decided to go to Toronto, except that it was then, as it has long remained, the city for getaways, for short vacations, for Southeastern Michiganders and upstate New Yorkers. Indeed, my girlfriend and I had spent a weekend traipsing up and down Yonge Street in the early bloom of our relationship. It was a fun city, a safe city, so we were going to hang out. I don't remember much except that we seemed to have had a good time. And though we often talked about doing it again or something similar, we never did. We, Bill and me, during the year my girlfriend and I first broke up, did, however, have more than our share of adventures. A few years later, in 1975, we were robbed at gunpoint, and my car, a 1974 Maverick, stolen. I recall the date only because I remember thinking as we were being driven around, guns at our backs, threatened with death, that I had almost made it, had almost gotten to my 21st birthday. Quite an accomplishment, I thought, for a young Black male from Detroit. I remember thinking that it was too hard, that I'd never get to hear the albums in the back seat, which I had recently picked up from the South End, the college newspaper where I worked as the pop record critic. Though Bill and I were, in fact, coming out of a Kentucky Fried Chicken, he'd insisted we stop at before I drove him home. We had just gotten out from work at Butler Shoes, our regular job. As it obviously turned out, our kidnappers let us go. There was no comic book magic of heroic getaways. I felt more embarrassed than anything, especially after we called the police, my parents, and my girlfriend. I was mad too. I wanted to hear Roy Hargrove's Song for My Father and the new Fleetwood Mac album, Rumors. I never replaced either album until they came out on CDs themselves, passé. Thanks.
Tyrone, thank you so much. I'd like to thank all of our readers, Tyrone, Brandon, and Perrin. Let's give them a hand in the room. Tomorrow night at 6:30, there will be another reading, Matt Hart, the second part of the Cincinnati contingent, myself, and Allison C. Rollins. I hope to see you there. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Weston.
You're welcome. See you later.
Yeah. Thanks, Perrin. Thanks, Audrey.